All right, great. Welcome again, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Peace Through Action USA's virtual learning event, Repairing Harm: How Communities Confront Difficult Histories. I'm Chris Wolonsky, Director of Programs and Partnerships at Peace Through Action USA, and tonight we're going to be talking about how every community has experiences that continue to shape life today. Some histories are widely known and discussed, while others remain conflicted, overlooked, or only partially understood. Communities respond to these histories in many different ways. Some seek greater understanding, others focus on strengthening relationships. Meanwhile, some communities create opportunities for remembrance, and others pursue restoration and repair. So, tonight we'll explore several of these approaches and consider what we can learn from them and apply in our scopes of influence. Along the way, I invite you to think about a community or social group that's meaningful to you, and we'll return to that throughout the evening. So tonight is a bit different from some of our virtual learning events, which are generally a bit more skills focused. Whereas tonight, you're going to be exposed to a wide variety of strategies. Tonight is almost a bit of a survey review of a great deal of strategies. So I had a lot of fun producing this event, and I think you might have an entertaining experience getting to see all these cool and novel, interesting ideas that people have come up with. But as the host for tonight's session, I'd like to briefly introduce Peace Through Action USA. Peace Through Action USA inspires and equips everyday people to increase safety, belonging, and peace in their relationships and communities by cultivating compassion and strengthening constructive communication and conflict resolution skills. While much of our work focuses on helping people build practical peace building skills they can apply in everyday life, tonight's conversation expands that work to the wider community level. We'll explore how we can strengthen understanding, build relationships, preserve memory, and support restoration in response to difficult histories. And at its heart, tonight's event asks a simple question: how can communities respond thoughtfully when the past continues to influence the present? And so that's the question that will be guiding most of our work tonight together. Here's a bit more about what we do, but I'd also like to take a moment to recognize and thank our strategic partners. We're especially grateful to Broadview Church for making this event possible tonight. As supporters in our work, we are profoundly grateful for their vision, dedication, and commitment to the pursuit of peace. Broadview Church's support in our work also includes being our local partner in our Community Peace Project concept in Calvert County, Maryland. For those joining from Calvert County, we look forward to staying connected with you through our newsletters and social media updates. We have exciting things coming with new opportunities to engage, learn, and take action, so stay tuned. Be on the lookout, especially for our Summer of Service program happening in July that guides youth in a week-long leadership development experience through community service. We're really excited about that this year. So we'll talk more about these initiatives at the end of this session, so you can learn some more about what we're doing on a local level. So now let's just take a bird's eye view and we'll kind of go through the outline of what tonight's going to look like for us. So we'll start with a bit of an opening reflection, just reflecting on these themes. And then we're going to explore 4 ways that communities often respond to difficult histories. And we'll look at these 4 primary categories, which I have organized as understanding, connection, remembrance, and restoration. And within each section, we'll look at practical peace practices and real-world examples from around the world. And then near the end of the session, we'll bring these ideas together into a simple framework that communities can use to reflect on their own challenges and opportunities. We'll close with a discussion, some reflection, and resources for continued learning. And my hope is that you'll leave tonight with a broader understanding of the many ways that you can respond when difficult histories continue to influence the present. So let's just check in together. Please share in the chat your name, where you're joining from, and one word that comes to mind when you hear the phrase difficult history. Just a reminder that there's no right or wrong answers. This is simply sharing our associations with the phrase difficult history. So whatever comes to mind for you. Awesome. We have Stephen from Kathmandu, Nepal. That's exciting. I think you may be our first person from Nepal to join us. I know we've had some folks from India join, but it's great to have you with us broadcasting from Nepal. And you said colonization. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's a great answer. Debbie from Kansas said segregation. Wonderful. We have Alan from California, Kelly from Nashville. Exploitation. Yeah. Problems. Yeah, definitely. This is a problematic subject that we're exploring tonight. Great. Well, thank you for sharing a bit about you. I'll share a little bit about me. My name is Chris Wolanski, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I serve as the Director of Programs and Partnerships for Peace Through Action USA. And throughout my career, I've worked in education, nonprofit leadership, social service, and community engagement. I also have a master's degree in communication and oral storytelling, and I'm a national poetry slam champion. And one of the reasons I'm excited about tonight is that every community has a story, and some stories celebrate resilience. Others invite communities to continue learning, reflecting, and growing. And tonight we'll explore how different communities around the world have responded to those stories and what we might learn from their experiences. But yeah, I have a few little, just a little collage of images of things that I think kind of represent who I am, at least as a facilitator. So I've got this little microphone, um, a chalkboard, because I've been involved in education for a while, some photos of my travels in Peru and Thailand, and just interest as an artist. So tonight is actually, in some ways, a good reflection of all those interests coming together. So let's just set up a bit of a frame for understanding tonight. I'd like you to begin just thinking of a community that's meaningful to you. So this might be your neighborhood, your hometown, a school, a workplace, potentially a faith community, or any other community that's important in your life. So just take a moment to picture that. And I do want to just note that sometimes the word community can be a bit abstract. It's like, I guess I'm in a community. I don't know. But you might also, if that's not really registering for you, you might also consider groups or activities you take part in. Maybe that's kickball or Brazilian jiu-jitsu or a book club. And another way you might think about a community is through the lens of identity. Sometimes people who belong to a social group might identify with others in that community. So you'll see that these groups also share a lot in common. But as you're reflecting on that community, I'd like you to just consider what stories have helped shape that community. We may see stories of success, resilience, conflict, challenge, loss. And every community carries stories that influence how people understand the past and imagine the future. And so as we move through tonight, I invite you to keep that community in your mind. We'll return to it several times throughout the evening. So first, I'm going to just open up and offer the opportunity for us to just talk out loud if anyone has any thoughts they'd like to share about this question. What responsibilities, if any, do communities have toward difficult histories? Feel free to share in the chat or out loud if you'd like. Do you feel that communities have a responsibility to share this? If you're sort of like, yeah, they definitely do. I just don't really know how to answer that. That's great too. Yeah, Debbie mentioned being willing to acknowledge harms and work towards preventing harm. Great. Thanks for sharing. Was someone else about to speak? I think I may have cut someone off.
Oh, this is Kelly from Nashville.
Hey there,
Um,
Kelly. Thanks for joining us
hey,
again. It's good to see you
uh,
again.
it's great to see you, and thank you very much for all of the work that you do to make our world a better place.
Oh,
I
thank you. Likewise. Thanks.
think just off the cuff, I think communities have a responsibility to honor struggle,
Mm,
people's bravery. I'm sitting here looking at John Lewis's books, The March, um, and I believe communities have an ob should have an obligation for like historic markers,
mm,
where significant struggles have taken place or deaths because of, exploitation or whatever,
yeah,
leadership. But I believe that, difficult histories should be brought to the forefront of communities so that we all have an appreciation of everyone's histories and struggles and just how our ancestors have lived their lives.
mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's such a meaningful intention, and I think that like summed up the intention of this event. So thank you for really kind of expressing where this that same intention that this event was designed out of. Um, so yeah, totally there with you.
I think about how we as Americans struggle to be both patriotic and proud as Americans, but to hold our original sin of slavery and the genocide of the American Indian.
Mm,
Holding both, they're seem to be in contradiction, but that's how do we hold that in a productive manner?
mm,
How do we mobilize history to make things better versus I also claiming victimhood when we had some agency.
mm. Wow, yeah, that's really well said. That's true. We do grapple with that sort of contested history inherently by being on American soil. We're totally right about that.
I don't know if it's contested. It's holding the contradiction,
Mm,
holding both sides are true sort of
mhm.
thing. And that's
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and just to echo what you said in the chat as well, ethics of truth, history misused to claim victimhood, a denial, agency. So thanks for sharing, Alan. Any other thoughts that anyone would like to share just before we move forward?
This is Kelly. I just have one other comment.
Yeah.
When I was in France a couple of years ago cycling, I went to a lot of bed and breakfasts, and there would be different like German people there, and we would all eat dinner together. And a lot of the German people made it very clear, they were on vacation, but they were taking time to visit cemeteries and to
Mm,
honor like what happened in World War One and World War Two. And I
mm.
thought that was like really interesting for me to understand that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting when you were explaining that, just kind of how national history is something that we're like kind of encompassed in. It's the communities that we inhabit have these like almost concentric circles that extend really far out. Um, so thank you for sharing that as well. All right, everybody. So we're gonna take a look at a pretty grand sweep of different strategies that communities employ to um, reckon with their history. And so we're gonna take a look at some of those tonight. But we just sort of voiced why this conversation matters, but really just kind of want to emphasize that communities shape their future through their response to the past. Um, The goal is to um, think about history and use it as a means by which we can shape our present decisions and hopefully influence the future. And as I mentioned, we're going to look at four main categories that I've sort of outlined for us to look at these range of responses. So the first category here is understanding, and this sort of encompasses practices that help communities learn more about the past and strengthen shared knowledge and meaning. There's also a set of practices that I've sort of labeled as connection, and these are practices that strengthen relationships, trust, and opportunities for engagement. Remembrance, which refers to a set of practices that preserve stories and strengthen collective memory. And then restoration, which are practices that address continuing impacts and create opportunities for repair. And I just want to mention that these categories aren't rigid. They often overlap, and sometimes a community will employ one or multiple, um, and there's no set sequence. It's sort of like um, a flower of life Venn diagram. So, these all sort of intersect and overlap and can be used in hybridized ways. Um, but my categories were really just to organize this into a sensible logic for us as a group tonight. So first we'll look at understanding. And the primary question underpinning this set of practices is, do we understand what happened? And how can we better understand the past? And so we can do this by gathering evidence, collecting stories, exploring multiple perspectives. And so we'll look at some examples of that now. And the first one we have here is truth commissions. Um, and so a truth commission is a temporary body created to investigate and document experiences from a difficult period in a community's history. These commissions gather testimony, review records, conduct research, and create reports that help communities better understand what happened. They can be especially helpful when information is incomplete, experiences have gone unrecognized, or maybe there's competing narratives about the past. So instead of focusing primarily on punishment, truth commissions emphasize learning, documentation, and public understanding. And at their core, they help communities answer this simple question: what happened and how can we better understand it? So let's look at one of the best known examples of this. All right, so we're going to look at the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So, following the end of apartheid, South Africa faced an enormous challenge. After decades of racial segregation, discrimination, violence, and injustice, the country had to decide how it would move forward while also acknowledging what had happened. To help meet that challenge, South Africa established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, often called the TRC. The commission held public hearings across the country and invited victims, survivors, witnesses, and others to share their experiences. The process generated thousands of testimonies and helped create a more complete public record of the past. Since the hearings were held publicly across South Africa, and in many cases they were televised, it allowed millions of people to witness stories that had rarely been heard before. While people continue to debate aspects of the TRC today, it remains one of the most influential examples of a community using truth seeking to strengthen public understanding. So here it might just prompt us to think, what can we learn from this? Communities often benefit from creating opportunities for people to share their experiences. And understanding doesn't happen on its own. It's something that we have to work towards. There's an active writing of history that needs to happen there. It's not this passive process. And that communities cannot learn from stories they never hear. So we'll take a look at historical investigation next. So this is our second practice. And this involves gathering evidence, reviewing records, and conducting research to better understand questions about the past. So sometimes important information is missing. Sometimes new evidence emerges. And other times, research brings overlooked experiences into public view. This can be especially helpful when communities are seeking greater clarity about events that continue to shape the present. So while a truth commission often emphasizes testimony and public participation, historical investigation really just places greater emphasis on research and documentation. So let's take a look at an example here. Um, for much of the 19th and 20th centuries, indigenous children in the United States were sent to federally supported boarding schools, which essentially were vacuums of cultural genocide. Children were forbidden from speaking their own language, practicing their traditions, or maintaining connections with their families. Although these schools affected generations of indigenous families, much of this history remained unfamiliar to the broader public. However, in recent years, the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative has worked to gather records, investigate sites, document experiences, and strengthen public understanding of this chapter of American history. Investigators have identified hundreds of boarding schools and documented burial sites that had previously received little public attention. Through this work, communities have gained access to information that supports learning, reflection, and future decision making. So through this, we might want to consider that communities make stronger decisions when they invest in learning. New questions might arise, new evidence can emerge, and new perspectives become visible. And, and within this mode of understanding, we might want to also consider oral histories. So here I have a photo of a grandmother from the Amazon named Maestra Olivia. And at the time I was living in the Peruvian Amazon, Maestra Olivia was murdered, unfortunately. And it was a serious effect on the community because she was, in no uncertain terms, a living library of knowledge and information that hadn't been written, but had been passed down orally for millennia. So yeah, oral histories give this emphasis on human lived experience. So we'll take a look at a case study here. So one example is the Slave Dwelling Project, which was founded by public historian Joseph McGill Jr. McGill noticed that many historic sites preserve the homes of enslavers. You know, you can go to a plantation tour, but they often gave far less attention to the places where enslaved people actually lived. So rather than simply studying these spaces during the day, McGill began spending the night in former slave dwellings. And those overnight stays became opportunities for storytelling, conversation, and reflection. And guiding people through this process of overnight stays where he wove stories and community conversations, his project invites participants to engage with these histories in a more personal and human way. So oral storytelling is great because rather than focusing only on documents or statistics, which has the sort of world of text, the textuality of history embedded in it, which is often entangled with privilege and access to education and literacy and all these kind of structural imbalances. Participants are able to encounter the lived experiences of people whose voices have often been overlooked. And so this just feels like a powerful example of how storytelling can deepen historical understanding. Next, surrounding this theme of understanding is public acknowledgement. Public acknowledgement means openly recognizing difficult histories or experiences and bringing them into public awareness. Communities may do this through statements, ceremonies, reports, commemorations, or educational initiatives. And while acknowledgement doesn't solve every challenge, it can create opportunities for learning, reflection, and future action. An example of this was at Georgetown University. In 1838, the university sold 272 enslaved men, women, and children to bolster the university's purse. In recent decades, Georgetown has researched, acknowledged, and publicly engaged with this history through educational initiatives, memorialization, and collaboration with descendants. And so the university has since updated its campus by renaming buildings, creating memorials, and working with these descendants to plan service projects. Another common example of acknowledgement that we may encounter is a land acknowledgement, where organizations recognize Indigenous peoples and their historical relationships to the land where events take place. And these approaches really illustrate how communities can bring difficult histories into public awareness. All right, so I want to just open the conversation back up to us here, and to think, if what opportunities might exist to strengthen understanding in a community you know and care about. So I'd like to invite you to return to that community you've been thinking about, and in the chat or out loud, what opportunities might exist to strengthen understanding there. Perhaps there are stories that deserve greater attention, or experiences that haven't been widely heard, questions worth exploring, or histories that could be acknowledged more openly. So you're welcome to share your ideas. Yeah, don't slip into punishment mode. It's great. How to avoid defensiveness. Yeah. Yeah, listening to all voices is great. Yeah, gathering that range of perspectives. All right. Great. So we'll take a look at our next category here, which is connection. And connection really is connected to the question, do we trust one another enough to move forward? So we'll look at some strategies here that people have employed surrounding this theme of connection. Oh yeah, great. In the chat, Alan mentioned, I see politicized history mobilized to help deny structural evil. I'm just going to pause for a second. Would you like to expand on that at all? Out loud, maybe? Or if not, that's okay. But I think it's an interesting emergent observation if you'd like to talk about it.
It's dangerous. Um, um, there's a discussion about the ethics of history and the mobilization of past trauma to basically enable current actions, justify current actions that I
Mm,
see happening very often. And how do we don't just it's very often that basically we learn from our victimizers how to victimize others.
mm,
We use our trauma to justify traumatizing others. I'm speaking in abstraction here because of, but that's the dangerous thing I see happening in the fraughtness of my community. Uh, yeah. So in the fraughtness my community, I'm talking about both my ethnic community and my greater community, which it inhabits, and trying to heal that gap. So
Mm. Yeah, that's a really powerful observation and a nuanced one. So thank you for bringing that up, that these are tools that can be used um,
right.
in a variety of ways, sometimes actually to continue the story in a
My community has documented its trauma extensively.
Mhm.
Oral history is the whole bit,
Mhm.
and I don't think it's helping.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah. Some of the other communities have not, and they
Mhm.
are just resurrecting that
Mhm.
to point out the situation,
Mhm.
and so um, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that reflection. That is a really important observation and thing that we should know when we're engaging with this history is like how our relationship to the process of documenting and the ways in which we
Yeah, because
use.
I wonder how the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa got started and didn't become a source of punishment toward some people
Mm.
and claims of yeah, punishment and also and defensiveness on that part. So they basically people. How did the people agree that we need to see the unvarnished truth and let things chips fall where they may, because
Yeah,
people are extremely vulnerable around these things and they're deeply vested in their own models.
right.
And there's both trauma in that, but also it holds us back from confronting, moving ahead. Yeah,
Mhm.
history is yeah. Uh, we sometimes need to escape history.
Mm. Yeah, wow. That's a great line. I'm gonna dog ear that one for later.
That's from the book Ulysses by James Joyce.
Oh, nice.
The Jewish character wants to escape history.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing those observations. That's really powerful stuff. And yeah, definitely got me thinking about it. And it also brings up like just the messiness of history and trying to catalog and talk about the things that have happened in the past. You know, there it's a negotiatory experience um to sort of work through all this stuff. So thank you for calling attention to that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I'm really glad we took that little moment to reflect on that. Thank you for sharing that, Alan. Cool. So, yeah, now we're looking at connection here. So these are some strategies that communities can employ to um, deepen relationships. And so creating opportunities for people to listen, learn, engage across differences. It can be especially helpful when communities are experiencing polarization, misunderstanding, or limited opportunities for a meaningful conversation. So the first is dialogue. This is really that opportunity to talk, listen, learn, and engage. And it's useful when understanding is limited across these lines of difference. We have at Peace Through Action have done some group dialogue. We did a dialogue event surrounding the theme of book banning, and it was a very challenging conversation when people are coming across lines of difference, trying to listen with each other and not fall into that pattern of debate. So it can be a challenge, um, but when that intention is there, it can be really powerful. An example of this strategy being used in the wild is the National Week of Conversation. So each year, organizations, schools, faith communities, and local groups across the country host conversations that encourage people from different backgrounds to engage respectfully with one another. Thousands of conversations take place across the country in libraries, schools, faith communities, workplaces, and online. And participants discuss community issues, current events, and personal experiences, not to reach agreement, but to strengthen understanding and connection. Dialogue doesn't require agreement. It simply creates space for people to better understand one another. All right, great. Now we'll take a look at one of my personal favorite strategies, which is symbolic community healing. And community healing includes efforts that strengthen belonging, rebuild trust, and support collective well-being. And communities can do this in a variety of different ways through storytelling, ceremonies, creative expression, shared projects, and community gatherings. And these efforts are especially helpful when communities are working to reconnect after difficult experiences. And one project that I found to be so exciting and interesting is Guns to Gardens. And I think I saw this happening in Oakland, California. But there are similar initiatives across the United States where organizations have hosted events where unwanted firearms are transformed into gardening tools. So participants, you know, donate their unwanted firearms, and then they can often watch them being cut apart and melted down before being forged into these tools for planting a garden in their community. Um, and these tools now become these artifacts for community gardens and other shared projects. And what makes this example especially powerful is that symbolism, where these objects associated with violence become tools that support growth, renewal, and community cultivation, quite literally. So I think this kind of shows us that we can be poetic in how we um, engage history and work towards sort of new alchemical and sort of welded histories together. Next is reconciliation. Reconciliation involves rebuilding relationships after conflict, division, or harm. And it often includes dialogue, relationship building, shared learning, and cooperation. It doesn't require everyone to agree. Instead, it creates opportunities for people to move forward together despite their differences. And we'll take a look at two examples here. So one is called Coming to the Table, and this is a national initiative that brings together descendants of enslaved people, descendants of enslavers, and others who want to explore the lasting legacy of slavery. Members often trace family histories together. They visit historical sites and participate in local dialogue circles. And through this process of dialogue, storytelling, shared learning, participants build relationships while engaging with difficult history. And so, this organization kind of shows that process of strengthening reconciliation by creating space for honest conversation and human connection. Another initiative is the Parents Circle or Families Forum. And this initiative brings together Israeli and Palestinian families who have each lost loved ones in the conflict, where members can regularly speak together in schools and community settings, sharing their stories side by side. Despite that profound loss, participants choose to engage in dialogue, education, and relationship building, which reminds us that reconciliation begins with recognizing one another's humanity. So communities can strengthen that connection when they invest in relationships, often across significant differences. So next, I just wanted to prompt you all to consider how connection might relate to the community that you had in mind. Some opportunities you might think about are chances for dialogue, spaces where relationships could be strengthened, or ways communities might support healing and reconciliation. So if anyone would like to share their thoughts on how that might apply in their community, feel free to share. Um, yeah, great. I'm just checking out the chat here, and Alan mentioned dialogue is a search for truth, whereas debate equals win the argument, zero sum game. Um, yeah, so that's great.
That debate versus dialogue was when my very bright teenage son would want to engage with me, and they wanted to debate me, and I said, I don't want to debate with you.
Mm,
I'd love you to prove me smarter than me, but I don't. But let's look for truth, not winning here.
yeah,
Um,
it's great.
the connection sort of stuff. My
Mhm,
wife's national group, which is the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, which is Jewish and Muslim women meeting and talking and building personal relationships, and before they get to the tough stuff around the tough stuff, is an example of that. And that the group is is began with local chapters, and now it's doing some national work with the friends. Yeah.
wow. If you don't mind me asking, so I immediately just forgot the name that you
Sisterhood
mentioned.
of Salam Shalom.
The Sisterhood of Salam Shalom.
Right.
What are some of the primary, how do they go about bringing their work out to the community, if you don't mind me asking? I'm just kind of
They
curious.
basically they just meet and build relationships, local relationships in
Mhm,
local chapters in towns, Albany, Sacramento, L.A., New York City, New Jersey, and then
mhm.
and that's what they're just building connections, and then they have friends that are of
Yeah.
the opposite religion. Now, you shouldn't say that, but that's kind of the way it's set up. And now they're working on some peace initiatives in lobbying Congress
Mm.
um, to cool down the Israel Palestinian uh, tragedy.
Yeah, wow.
That's their project, and yeah. So
That's amazing. So they're kind of working on both the local level and wider kind of regional and national level too.
right, and people evolve as they learn about one another. Their beliefs evolve.
Mm,
And it's quite fascinating to hear stories about how, and that's not the agenda, but it's one of the things that organically happens.
mhm.
You have a relationship with the other, and
Yeah.
then they're more than there's you have a face and a family behind what's going on, you know.
Hmm.
And that's happened to me. I mean, I've been transformed by people I know and relationships I have.
Yeah.
But yeah, so um,
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing that,
yeah,
offering that this activity that your wife is involved in. It sounds really inspiring and a really perfect example of that connection.
yeah. Two slides back, I think my wife knows some of the actors in that slide. The
Yeah. Oh,
I
really?
think that I would not be. I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that my wife would know of, or people would know of
Mm.
this 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 group, right?
Wonderful.
Um,
Yeah, that's great. Well,
But the Jewish community is particularly split over this issue,
mm,
and
mhm.
coming to terms and engaging in dialogue with the other. That's one of the
Yeah,
tactics to kind of, yeah.
I can
So,
imagine that would be a challenge in a way because there's that sort of division between Israeli and Palestinian, and then there's sort of the is this what it sounds like you're saying is that there's a sort of a split within the Jewish community as well around.
it's a spiritual crisis. It's
Mm,
a spiritual crisis in the American Jewish community or on the international Jewish community about what's going on.
mm,
The toxic mix when you have church and state come together, it's very fraught.
yeah, I can
But
imagine.
then it puts people, and then you have loyalties and nationalism and um, history you've been taught, and maybe you need to unlearn or maybe not, and then there's, you know, and the history is and the it's not black or white. Both things can be true, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But people are traumatized. You tend to see things black and white, and
Mhm.
you know. Um,
Yeah.
and then you have outside actors coming into your community who have agendas, the
Mhm.
politicization.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, there's sort of this um just intersecting stories and narratives and influences that are all happening at once can make it really challenging to
And
navigate.
people have yeah, and the Israel-Palestine issue is a wonderful wedge issue for the Republican Party and to the Jewish community. Um,
Mm,
and we have that coming in, that influence, and then we have then all the propaganda that's entailed with that, and then
mm,
national organizations who are funded by mega donors who have agendas that and there's
right.
no accountability to the organizations have no accountability to the grassroots.
Mm,
So yeah, we have that. So, and
right.
an organization in New York City doesn't really care what it does, what its impact is on in little towns
Mm,
and out in the West, in California.
yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's so true. It's really just as you mentioned, your some of your wife's kind of activism is going from the local to national scale. You're also getting that sort of reverse feedback from both local and national influences in your area. So that's a challenge, definitely.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Alan. That's a really fascinating experience to offer.
It's a really interesting problem. I wish I was not so interesting.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah, great.
I'd like to hear from, I'd be curious about other people are struggling with too. Yeah. How they see this. Yeah.
Yeah. If anyone would like to share, feel free. We'll also have a little bit of time at the end to kind of troubleshoot and talk about your communities too, if you're not up for it now. But also if you have a question, if you're noticing, hey, there's a lot of division in the community. I'm noticing there's these really sharp differences, or like it feels like there's a gap, feel free to ask any questions you might have too. This is you- uh, I'm not I'm not um, calling upon you all to talk or anything. It's just I want to invite the opportunity that if you want to troubleshoot something throughout the rest of the night, feel free. This is a great opportunity to just say, "Hey, I'm curious. I don't get what's going on here. How can we solve some of this stuff or work towards resolving some of this stuff?" All right, great. So next we'll take this presentation into asking, how do communities remember? And we'll look at a set of strategies now that really seek to work through that question. Um, and the idea is that understanding helps communities learn, connection helps communities strengthen relationships. And this third question of how do we remember is really important. And there's processes by which we can do that through memorialization, community arts, and public memory projects, which we'll get into now. So first is memorialization. We've all probably encountered a memorial, whether um, we were consciously visiting it or we sort of stumbled upon it. But this is a practice that communities use to preserve memory. It includes monuments, memorials, museums, commemorative spaces that help communities remember important people, events, and experiences. And these spaces can honor those who were affected, strengthen public awareness, and encourage future generations to continue learning. So let's take a look at an example here, which is the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Has anyone ever heard of this before?
It's amazing.
Oh, you've been?
Yes, the Civil Rights Tour in Birmingham, Montgomery, Atlanta. Yeah, it was just visiting Montgomery has to be and Birmingham have to be Montgomery particularly. The museums there are just they just shake you to your skill. I get we had
Yeah.
some, I had a black person with me and he was flooded. He had to leave the
Uh,
museum. It was so
wow.
intense. So
Wow. Yeah.
so yeah.
Can imagine. Yeah. Yeah. My dad and stepmom live in Florida, and currently in Pittsburgh. I'm eager to make the trip the next time I do a road trip to see them. Um, but yeah, so the National Memorial for Peace and Justice was created by the Equal Justice Initiative, and it's a memorial that honors thousands of African Americans who were victims of racial terror lynchings. The memorial contains hundreds of suspended steel monuments, each representing a county where documented racial lynchings occurred. And as visitors move through the memorial, they're invited to learn, reflect, and engage with a history that was often overlooked in public life. And so this memorial sort of demonstrates how physical spaces can help communities remember and continue learning from the past. Another strategy here is community arts. And this is a process that uses creative expression to preserve stories, honor experiences, and strengthen collective memory. Projects might include murals, performances, exhibits, music, storytelling, or quilting. And these approaches invite people to participate in remembrance rather than simply observe it. Um, and here I just included a little photo of a community art project that we did with the Calvert Peace Project, where we made a mural with a group of youth. And it was a really amazing opportunity for them to collaboratively share their ideas. Um, and, it was a group of kids who were we gave them pieces of paper, draw some images that represent your community, and they talked about what their county meant to them. And we tried to culminate that all together into a public mural project where we set it up on this wall. They all painted it together. And if you look really closely, you can see all their little handprints as a border. And so it was this really great opportunity to um, have the youth express their participation in their community. Um, so yeah, just kind of wanted to give that a little shine for us. But a good sort of case study about how this might look through the lens of history is the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And this is one of the most well-known examples of community arts. The project began in 1987 as a way to honor individuals who died from AIDS. Family members, friends, and community members created individual quilt panels that commemorated loved ones and preserved their stories. Some panels include photographs, clothing, handwritten messages, or personal mementos. And over time, the quilt grew into one of the largest community arts projects in the world. And today it contains tens of thousands of panels representing lives, relationships, experiences, and memories. The quilt serves as both a memorial and a form of public education. And so this really kind of demonstrates how creative expression can be used to strengthen remembrance and preserve stories that matter. It's a pretty huge quilt. Next are public memory projects. And these efforts weave history into everyday community life rather than placing it in a single monument or museum. It's sort of like sprinkling these little things around. And it helps keep important stories visible where people live, work, and gather. And an example of this that I found super interesting was called Stolperstein, which I guess in German is probably Stolperstein, which translates to stumbling stones. And this was in Germany and many other European countries. And through this project, it places small brass plaques in sidewalks outside the former homes of people who were persecuted and killed during the Holocaust. Each brass plaque includes the person's name, date of birth, and what became of them. The plaques are intentionally modest. You encounter them while walking through everyday spaces, and people often discover them unexpectedly and pause to learn about someone who once lived there. Today, tens of thousands of Stolperstein have been installed throughout Europe. The project demonstrates how communities can weave remembrance into everyday life. So I think what's so powerful about this is just that emphasis on bringing it into the everyday and that sense of randomness that you might encounter one of these in an unexpected place. Um, that sometimes history doesn't always happen just in the center square or the big park, it's actually kind of in the lived shared spaces, the sidewalks and kind of nooks and crannies, the interstitial spaces that we inhabit in communities.
The land dedications that are beginning up public, most public meetings, at least in California, are
Mm.
another more important part of it. Yeah, everything begins with that. Um,
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's a great example. Yeah, as I was producing this session, I was thinking about that, for myself, and it really kind of rattled me how little I know about the land I inhabit. Um, but yeah, thanks for sharing that. So yeah, I guess I'm going to prompt you to think about remembrance. You know, this might be something you currently can witness in your community. How does your community preserve important stories and memories? Um, maybe maybe that's missing in your community. Maybe there are some stories that haven't been told, that maybe you would want to see told more, you know? Um, and sometimes these processes of memorials are ways that we even know about this stuff. All right, great. So we'll keep moving here. Next is restoration. And kind of the undergirding question of restoration is what do we do now? So, throughout tonight's event, we've explored ways communities strengthen understanding, build connection, and preserve memory. But many communities also ask another question: what actions might support restoration? And sometimes that means returning something that was lost. Sometimes it means addressing impacts that continue into the present, um, and strengthening accountability and repairing relationships. And so, in this final section, we'll explore these practices that I've sort of clumped and clustered together into this notion of restoration. So the first is restitution, and this is a practice that involves returning something that was taken, lost, or wrongfully withheld. This is the kind of process that would make Indiana Jones turn in his grave. It might include land, cultural artifacts, property, rights, or other tangible resources. Restitution is most helpful when there's an opportunity to restore something specific. So, an example of this would be land return initiatives. So, in recent years, various organizations, governments, and communities have participated in efforts to return land to indigenous nations. These initiatives take many forms. Some involve transferring ownership, other times, it's sort of a co management agreement, a conservation partnership. And while these approaches vary, their efforts share a common goal, which is to return land or stewardship responsibilities to communities with longstanding historical relationships to that land. These initiatives demonstrate one way communities can pursue restoration through tangible action. When you kind of look at this map, it's um, a bit jarring in some ways. There's a great deal of federal land and not a whole lot of reservations. Um, but it shows that's an effort that can be improved upon in our country. And an organization doing some of that work is called Land Back. So that's sort of an initiative that one might check out and look up. Another is artifact repatriation. So this is a second example that involves the return of cultural artifacts. Museums and institutions around the world have increasingly returned cultural objects, sacred items, and human remains to communities from which they were originally taken. For many communities, these items represent far more than historical objects. They carry cultural, spiritual, educational, and historical significance. And that can often support cultural continuity, strengthen community connections, and help restore relationships with the past. Um, I spent a summer in London when I was 19 at the British Museum, and it was as fascinating as it was kind of also interesting to see how the museum was wrestling with the origin of a lot of the artifacts that they came into possession of. It's like we got this really through this colonial enterprise. And now having to kind of wrestle with that process of, do we return these items? Do we keep them? What's the ethical decision there? And who owns this? But yeah, I think Egypt is a great example of how that's being negotiated right now in terms of artifacts. But you might also see that locally in terms of like arrowheads and items. Um, Potentially, if you live like in the West, a lot of times there's those paleoliths. I think that's the right word. Markings in stone and things like that. Next is reparation. So unlike restitution, which returns something specific, reparation addresses impacts that continue into the present. And communities may do this through investment, scholarships, services, educational initiatives, or other efforts that strengthen future opportunities. A good example of this happened in Illinois, and it comes from Evanston. This program was developed in response to decades of discriminatory housing policies that contributed to lasting inequities and limited housing opportunities. And in 2021, Evanston became one of the first US municipalities to launch a local reparations program designed to address the continuing effects of historical housing discrimination experienced by Black residents. The program provides eligible residents with housing-related assistance and support. While people hold a variety of perspectives about how reparations should be designed and implemented, the Evanston Initiative offers an example of a community seeking to address present-day impacts connected to historical policies. The program illustrates how communities can move beyond acknowledgement and explore actions intended to strengthen opportunity and support restoration. So a guiding question here is just, surrounding impacts that continue into the present, having to take stock of some of those impacts. Great. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. All right, great. So we're going to take a look at restorative justice next. We've talked a bit about restorative justice in previous events, but it's always a good theme that we can return to as a framework. And this focuses on repairing relationships, strengthening accountability, and in addressing the impacts of harm. So instead of asking only what rule was broken, restorative approaches also ask who was affected, what needs emerged, what actions might support repair. And so an example of this is in schools. So many schools have adopted restorative circles as an alternative or complement to traditional disciplinary approaches. When conflict occurs, students, educators, and others affected by the situation come together in a structured process to discuss what happened, how people were affected, and what steps might help repair relationships moving forward. So rather than just sort of like assigning consequences, the idea is, can we take accountability? Can we understand the harm we've caused and work to repair it? Um, Now, this is a bit of a challenge sometimes when the impacts are hard to move through or people have been like kind of severely impacted. Um, that can be tough to navigate. But we did watch a film some years ago called Circle Up, and the story is about this woman um, whose son was murdered, and she went through this restorative process with her son's killer, and kind of like working through the process of learning what he was going through and his process of learning what she was going through really made the experience so much more meaningful for both of them in a way. And it created that opportunity to take full accountability and really like lean into the pain that had been caused by this action. That's sort of an extreme example, but restorative practices also are really great for like more minor disciplinary challenges. Things that like adolescents and juveniles go through are like a really good framework for restorative processes. So if you're in a school or even a parent, a restorative approach can be really useful. So yeah, the theme kind of undergirding that is that accountability and restoration can work together. And the emphasis here is on accountability. So surrounding restoration, just kind of want to prompt you to think about that. What opportunities might exist to support restoration where you currently live? How might that look for you in the area in which you live? Does anyone have any thoughts on how that might look in their community or their area? Feel free to share in chat or out loud.
We have a There was a human relations commission in our city
Hmm.
that used one of the techniques to basically document and get verbal histories of of wrongs people have perceived
Hmm.
themselves by being Islamophobia. Okay,
Hmm.
and some of those were from the Jewish community.
Hmm.
Members of the Jewish community had done that,
Wow.
and those people who were not mentioned by name but have implication basically
Hmm.
mobilized the entire the organized some parts of the organized Jewish community to fight back and to accuse the city of anti-Semitism for surfacing these experienced stories.
Wow.
Um, and as so you see the techniques of surfacing and
Hmm.
surfacing and noting and hearing and listening and all oral histories, you hear that, and then you see
Hmm.
this response,
Yeah.
and that has been destructive and tearing people apart. The Jewish
Hmm.
community is not of all of a piece. The Jewish community's got a split on this,
Hmm.
but no one attempted to bring the two groups together to talk and to
Hmm.
hear one another and to hear their
Yeah.
real grievances and to try to restore an understanding that there was feel pain on both sides of the issue. And
Right.
um, I attempted to do it and I was not successful.
Uh-huh.
It was in uh, maybe it wasn't ready, maybe it was too soon. It
Mhm.
had to work through the political process, but the conflict actually has made the New York Post, someone
Wow.
mobilized it for their particular agenda, and it
Wow.
has not been good for our not. It has caused some harm in our community,
Mhm.
and we're trying to get the people on both sides to talk. Now, I'm a
Mhm.
warrior on one side, but I also understand we need weavers. There's two types of activists I have, two models,
Yeah,
being a warrior and being a weaver.
I
And you
like
need
that.
warriors and you need weavers, and you guys are preaching the weaving side, and that's
Yeah,
important. But
yeah.
and Martin Luther King was a warrior. Let's be
Mm.
clear. Let's be clear.
Right, right.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
he did it with a heart. So how do you, yeah. The restoration is an important part of
Mm.
restoring things. But
Yeah.
you go to the civil rights, you tour the South, and you see the interaction between the warriors and the weavers,
Hmm.
and the people who are stirring things up and causing good trouble, which is
Hmm.
the opposite of cooling things down and restoring and restoration.
Yeah.
They're ripping and making visible the wounds that we need to put
Right.
together in a new creative way. But unless someone basically surfaces the problem in a way that's very astringent and uncomfortable, we don't address the real wounds. Uh,
Right.
so that's both can be true.
Yeah. 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 I like this idea of the warrior and the weaver in that, the warrior is having to take that active process. We can't really fall asleep at the wheel here and expect that to work. Got to stay
Confronting
diligent.
there's a memory you have, and the memory is a false one, and we need to take it apart, make it the astringent truth visible, and then put it back together in a more just fashion. um
Mhm.
yeah, and it's very difficult, but that's how we move ahead. And the truth is, uh if unless you're uncomfortable, you're not going to grow and change.
Mhm.
If you're comfortable, you don't want to, why change? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that's the warriors make us uncomfortable and the weavers put it back together and put the stitches in.
Yeah.
So,
Definitely. Yeah. And also thank you for sharing your own experience of trying to work through restoration with your community and how sometimes a community isn't ready for it. You brought up a really good point that sometimes these things don't, you know, kind of
not
this
ready, and maybe
this
it's not the right time.
yes.
We need to basically surface more of the grievances, and people need to be heard, and they have to express their power. Yeah.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I may have been wrong. I I'm not sure whether I may have been wrong in my trying to put things back together prematurely. It didn't
Mhm.
happen, but I may have been wrong. I know I got a lot of a little some grief about it from people I thought were my allies. So
Yeah.
they may have been very well right.
Mhm. Yeah. That's definitely a challenge. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that.
I, yeah.
All right, so great. I'm gonna ask us now that we've heard this range of strategies, think about what patterns do you notice? We're looking across the examples here to see um, what we can find in common among these strategies. So again, just to review, the four ways that communities can respond is through a range of strategies that we can categorize under understanding, connection, remembrance, and restoration. And I just want to emphasize that communities often need multiple responses or, you know, a phasal process where they go through one thing and then the next thing is capable. Kind of like what Alan was saying, like maybe we need to understand it more before we can like work to restore it. Maybe there needs to be more sharing happening or connection happening before we're ready to meet at this level. Um, but yeah, I just want to emphasize, these all can show up in different modes and there's no set step. There's no set of like sequence or anything. There's no step one to or step one, two, three. Um, it's unfortunately the communities we work in are have to be tailor made for the communities we're in. Um, so again, there's four diagnostic questions that we want to ask when we're engaging in with history. And just want to emphasize that these moments can still feel complicated. But first, understanding. Do we understand what happened? And how can we increase that sense of understanding? Do we trust one another enough to move forward? And if not, then how can we work through that together to trust each other better? Then asking, how is this story remembered? How are we going through the process of telling this story and remembering it together as a collective? And restoration really kind of plumbs that question, are the effects still visible today? And you know, how can we affect the present and the future by um, engaging with the past? So now I just kind of wanted to walk us through this process of community mapping. And so these are those questions that came up. And so when you've been thinking about a community you know and care about, um, now I'm wondering, which question feels most relevant to you? If you could share in the chat, which question feels most relevant, um, and which response might be most helpful in your opinion. Do you see opportunities for understanding in your community, connection, remembrance, restoration? Um, Feel free to share your ideas in the chat. We'd love to hear what has come up for you. Um, so yeah, feel free to share in the chat, or also, if anything is emerging that you'd like to share, you're totally welcome to verbally share as well. I'd say one response that I've kind of witnessed is a need for a connection, especially with um, immigrant communities. I've noticed often will be siloed in places where I've lived, and that often feels like a history that is really foreign to me. So, I see that opportunity for understanding, how that happened, but also like the connection to help sort of bridge that gap. Any other ideas that folks might have? Feel free to share.
Because the problem I'm focused on is a local one.
Mhm.
Um, some people are thinking bigger picture. I think connection is what I think it needs to happen within the Jewish community and with the Jewish community and the Muslim Arabs and Palestinian. That's what needs to happen
Mhm.
because the re remembrance is fraught. understanding that everybody has different facts, and we can
Mm,
have a fact battle. That's a debate. You've seen
mhm.
that, you know. So just connection because we share the commons in our community, and assumingly there's some shared values about making the commons all. So
Yeah, definitely.
that's connection seems to be
Mm.
sense. But you gave me some ideas here.
I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Alan. Yeah, it does sound like connection is uh is hard to dispute. When some of the other modes can be fraught, like you mentioned. Um, and echoing this idea of connection, Debbie also brought up connection, where we start seeing each other as humans and not the other. Yeah, that's so true, Debbie. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think we've all of us who lived through the year 2020 can can identify with this idea of polarization happening in the US.
And I wonder if the other wants to engage. And it's
Mm,
actually, to be honest, it's a little scary if they do, instead
right.
of basically just simply black and whiting it. It's actually kind of
Mm,
scary, and it's a to engage
mhm.
in this is to be vulnerable. And I think that's lurking behind all this stuff here,
Yes. Thank you
especially
for
the connection
bringing
part. Yeah,
thank you for
because you
bringing
have
that
to
up.
take a risk.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That is we talk about that a lot here around bridge building and having to ask, are there bridges to nowhere sometimes where we're trying to establish this connection, but there's a community that's being like actively damaged or oppressed by people, and kind of forcing them to engage, um, puts them in a space of vulnerability. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
But also your reaching out puts you in a space of vulnerability too.
Mm,
And you need to
right.
nurture and protect yourself as part of that process. All that's going on there. Yeah.
Definitely.
Acknowledging your risk and your vulnerability is part of being able to be that way. I mean, King was amazingly vulnerable, as we know, and he knew it, and you know what happened. But yeah,
Right, right. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's so true. So yeah, these are some strategies we might use, and they take a lot of consideration and nuanced thinking about. So thank you all for engaging with that tonight. I just wanted to have us look at this question again, just as something to chew on, as food for thought for you moving forward. What responsibilities, if any, do communities have toward difficult histories, and how might that play out in the communities in which you inhabit? So that being said, thank you for spending this time learning and reflecting together tonight. Um, I would like to ask you a favor before we move into ways to stay connected. If you could please take a moment to complete this short post-event survey. It helps us understand what was useful, what could be stronger, and how we can improve future programs. And I just dropped that link in the chat here for you now. So yeah, if you could fill that out, it gives us a lot of insight into what worked, what didn't, and what you connected with, and it helps us just sort of shape events for the future. So here's some ways you can engage with us. You can learn more about repairing harm. Um, and a great way to connect with us is through our email. So I'm going to share those links as well in the chat here. So you can sign up for our email, promote our content, uplift some of our work in your spiritual community if that works for you. And volunteering, we're eager to work with volunteers. And there's a wide variety of programs that we do surrounding volunteering that I'd love to connect with you about. You can also start a community project and donate as well. So we'd love to stay in touch on social media. It's a simple way to stay connected with us. So yeah, feel free to find us on all these different platforms and uh, spread peaceful actions in your community by sharing or nominating some things. You can also sign up um, on our email list, as I mentioned, volunteering with us, and that can look in a variety of ways. We're happy to tailor that, to your capacity and your skills and what interests you. If you ever feel inclined to volunteer with us, so yeah, don't be shy. I love working with volunteers. Um, Next, yeah, you can support our mission through a gift of money for peace. Um, we are a nonprofit and we're grateful for all of that. So thank you for that. And thank you to Sandra and Angelia for your comments. I appreciate it as your facilitator. So thank you. I also would just want to thank one more time, Broadview Church and the Calvert Peace Project for their partnership and leadership. Their commitment to community peace building makes events like this possible tonight. So thank you so much to them. And here's my contact information as well. If you have questions or want to support um, putting these skills into practice or exploring next steps. If you're working in a community and ever just want to brainstorm or talk with someone about what you're doing and see if there's new ways you can approach it or challenges you're experiencing, I'd love to connect with you. So if you remember one thing from tonight, remember this: before choosing a response, take time to learn more about the situation, and different communities need different tools. And you have a wide tool set to use to make that happen. So thank you all so much for spending your evening with us. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your experiences and connecting. And just so grateful to have you. So thank you so much, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful night.
Can you stay on for a minute or two for a talk with me?
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, most
I'm
definitely. I'll stop the recording here and we'll hang out for a little while.
okay, very good.
All right, sounds great. Thank you, everybody.